before making your Game Week 27 transfers, make sure you watch this video. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to run through the key transfer tips ahead of Game Week 27. But in the meantime, it's worth noting that blank Game Week 29 is coming very quickly now. It's on the horizon, and even though it won't look like a blank game week in the app yet, all it's going to take is the FA Cup results in midweek, and we'll start seeing blanks confirmed for that game week. So if you can, I would hold off making transfers until we get those results, because it will change your transfer strategy going into Game Week 29. And certain teams might be blanking in 29 that we don't know yet. And all of a sudden, your whole transfer strategy, your whole outlook is going to change once those blanks get confirmed. So for now, I would hold off. But obviously, teams that are locked into playing Game Week 29, if you want to avoid the free hit, are going to be really crucial nonetheless. So there are 3 fixtures already locked in. You can see them on the screen now. They include assets from Spurs, from Aston Villa, from West Ham, Brentford as well will play. So all of those transfers are pretty safe for 29. But there are a number of fixtures that aren't confirmed to go ahead yet. And all it's going to take is that Premier League side getting through in their FA Cup tie, and that fixture will get called off. So Chelsea versus Leeds, as one key example, one that I wanted to pull out. If Chelsea beat Leeds, then Arsenal and Chelsea can't play in Game Week 29. They play each other because Chelsea will be playing the quarter-final. Now, obviously, it's more likely than not that Chelsea beat Leeds, although obviously upsets can happen. Leeds are playing phenomenally well in the Championship at the moment, and Chelsea are not in fantastic form. So if Leeds were to spring an upset, then Arsenal versus Chelsea would go ahead in Game Week 29, and that would change our outlook on that game week and on our transfers for the next 2 or 3 weeks absolutely on its head. That would flip our script and change what we want to do in FPL for the next few weeks. So I would personally, if you're able to, wait and see what the FA Cup results are, because it could even change things like chip strategy for you. In the meantime, though, let's have a look at some of the key players and the key discussion points and start figuring out what our moves could be based on these FA Cup results. So let's start off with one of the key disappointments from Game Week 26. Hwang Hee-Chan sadly blanked against Sheffield United. It looked like almost an inevitability that he was going to blank after so many managers, including myself, went there. The data was good. He was hopefully going to be on penalties. And at 5.5 million at the time, it was a pretty easy route to get there for a lot of managers. So his effective ownership in and around the top 100k went from something like 5% to almost 50% in certain patches as well. So he was brought in by a lot, obviously disappointed us in the 26 game, but I think it's worth noting that in FPL, there's never such thing as a certainty. Even the best players blank sometimes. And whilst he's not one of the best players, I don't think anyone should be sat there thinking, oh, I made a massive mistake going for Hwang Hee-Chan in Game Week 26. The data and the fixtures were both on our sides. And these things do happen. He doesn't return in every week. No player does. The fixtures are still good. So I think we're at a point now where, because he's blanked in Game Week 26, it's going to be really tempting to sell him. And I myself do have a move I could make to get rid of him and attack the next patch of good fixtures. But I didn't want to bring him in just for 1 week. I think it is worth noting that Sheffield United wasn't the only week I was hoping you'd get a return in. Newcastle away from home in 27 is not a bad fixture whatsoever. They are one of the worst defences in the league this season, based on underlying XGC per 90 as well. It's not just an eye test thing. They are in the bottom 3 when it comes to defensive statistics. And then Fulham in Game Week 28 as well, also not great in that exact same metric. So Wolves assets, Neto as well, I would include in this. I would still say you don't need to desperately get rid of them right now. For the next 2 weeks, they could easily get returned. And it just seems kind of inevitable that he blanks in the week we all expect him to score in. And then when we all get rid of him because he's blanked in 26, he'll then go and score in 27 or 28. That being said, though, the data, whilst it's around 0.5 XGI per 90, it is worth noting that there are going to be other options which will be appealing, especially if you're on certain strategies after the FA Cup results. So we don't know whether Wolves play yet. if they do play in game week 29 against Bournemouth, then that's a good fixture, and it makes the next 5 look actually pretty promising. So if you were able to save the free hit and Wolves were playing in game week 29, then maybe you don't want to get rid of him because the next 5 fixtures look pretty good. However, if they do blank in game week 29, then maybe you want to save the free hit by bringing in an Aston Villa player. Maybe you want to attack with a Spurs player who both have confirmed fixtures in game week 29 already. Or maybe there's another team that we don't yet expect to play in game week 29 that will have a fixture put in. So I don't want to be rigid. I don't want to be stubborn about this. He's certainly not a player that I'm locked into holding for the next few weeks. But I would urge caution because the next few fixtures are good. And if they do get that game week 29 fixture, I think he's still a pretty decent hold. At the end of the day, 10 goals and 3 assists in limited minutes, because he went off to the Asia Cup for a few weeks as well, is really not bad at all at his price point. So very frustrating. Game week 26 did not go to plan whatsoever. But I think if you've got no other obvious midfielder you want to go for, I think he's absolutely fine to hold on to for the next couple of weeks. So we've talked about one side of the coin. Let's talk about the other side of the coin. And a lot of managers who were debating which midfielder to go for this week were picking quite largely between a Wolves midfielder and an Aston Villa midfielder. Most of the Wolves midfielders, barring Sarabia, if you went there, congratulations, blanked, whereas all of the Aston Villa midfielders pretty much, or at least the 2 that we were all looking at in Leon Bailey and Douglas Luiz, both hauled. And Douglas Luiz specifically getting 15 points with 2 goals from open play, which is very rare for a player in his position, and just Douglas Luiz in general, is going to hurt managers quite a lot if you didn't go there and you went for the Wolves midfielder instead. For what it's worth, I don't think the decision-making process was bad, whichever way you went. I think it made a lot of sense to go for Hwang Hee-Chan because the data was good. It was a great run of fixtures, better than Aston Villa's run of fixtures, I believe. Anyway, that's my personal opinion. But Aston Villa had the benefit of game week 29 being confirmed, and we know how good they are as a team, and we also know how talented Douglas Luiz is, not just from open play, but also he's a set-piece specialist too. So I think there were plenty of merits to both routes and both decisions. Obviously, the outcome is very noisy and it's gone sharply one way rather than the other, but I don't think anyone should be kicking themselves and blaming the process if you went for a Wolves midfielder and it didn't pay off this week. That being said, though, Douglas Luiz is a good pick moving forwards. He was a good pick last week as well, by the way, but the data isn't quite as good as some of the alternatives. However, because he's on penalties, because he's in a fantastic side at the moment, and especially because he's guaranteed that fixture in game week 29, it does make a lot of sense to go there. He is also a bonus points monster. Any returns he gets, he tends to get pretty significant bonus points alongside that. So if he gets an assist and that's it, you're probably still looking at 7 or 8 points from Douglas Luiz. Whereas with other midfielders who only get an assist, it's probably just going to be 5 points. So it makes a lot of sense to go there. He's not the most exciting option when you look eye test wise, but the data's still decent. He is on set pieces and the fixtures are good as well. Now, one key statistic I'd note on Douglas Luiz, if you were considering going there this week, Luton on paper is a great fixture, and I'm not going to tell you it's not because Luton are poor defensively, Aston Villa are likely to score a few goals. But interestingly, Douglas Luiz's home-away split is pretty shocking. So at home, he's averaging over 7 points a week in all home fixtures across the season. So averaging over 7. Away from home, he's averaging under 3 points per game week or across the season. That's a really big drop-off. That's a huge contrast in the types of returns he gets. And it's getting to the point now where you'd start to think that that's beyond coincidence. Usually if there's a little bit of difference after a few weeks, I'd kind of just dismiss that. But because it's such a wide difference, I wonder if Aston Villa set up in a slightly different way. He plays a deeper role away from home and therefore is less likely to get in and around the box and get those cutbacks, which he obviously benefited from once this week, and maybe not get involved in the attacking build-up play quite so much. That being said, though, wouldn't want to put anyone off going there this week. Luton away from home is still a good fixture, even if it is away from home. Tottenham after that, they leak goals, and then the confirmed fixture in game week 29 as well. It's all good, really. I just wanted to note the fact that the home-away split is worth noting. And Douglas Luiz, generally speaking, is still a fantastic pick. I just wouldn't be too worried about the fact that if you went with a Wolves player, they haven't scored and Douglas Luiz has. These things happen in FPL. Sometimes two good players, two good options, one will score, one won't, and that just happens. So I think, sadly, it's gone against me in game week 2026, but hopefully you benefited from the likes of Douglas Luiz, and he's certainly a player that I will be looking at for the next few weeks as well. So another player that really disappointed managers in game week 26 came off the bench, got a yellow card, so it came out with a 0-pointer. Kevin De Bruyne has been very frustrating for those who went there in the last couple of weeks especially. Now, it's been a case of diminishing returns since he came back, obviously, burst onto the scene with a 12-pointer, and it's gotten gradually worse and worse ever since. And at 10.7 million now, got a price drop last night as well, he is very expensive for a lack of guaranteed minutes. So despite the fact the underlying data is very good, despite the fact he's gotten 5 attacking returns since he's back from injury, a lot of managers are looking at getting rid and attacking the next few fixtures, especially because when you look at it on paper, Man City's next 5 fixtures are not looking fantastic. However, it is worth talking about that Man City are always going to be the difficult fixture. No matter who they play, they've always got a decent chance of winning. So even if it's red on the ticker, attacking returns are still fairly likely for any of their players. So I wouldn't let the fixture list necessarily put you off in isolation. But when you combine that with the fact that his expected minutes aren't guaranteed, and the fact that he's not the talismanic figure at Man City, he's not the one who's going to bury all the goals, I can understand why people will be getting rid of Kevin De Bruyne. However, I think it is worth thinking about just holding on to him for one more game week. And as a Kevin De Bruyne non-owner, it's easy for me to say that. So don't take this as telling you what to do. You can absolutely get rid of him. I would completely understand the decision making. However, I think because it's Man United next up, especially at home as well, and because he's just had a rest and came off the bench, so we know he's not carrying a major injury or anything, it is going to be fairly likely, in my view anyway, that he starts the United game. It's a big game. Kevin De Bruyne raises his games for the big matches. So I would expect him to start against Man United. And if you've still got him and other people are selling, then it could be an opportunity for you to cash in on some of that underlying data and some of that frustration from the last few weeks where he hasn't been returning. He could easily cash all of that in game week 27 against Man United. Big derby, big game. Man City are going to be really up for it. I personally expect him to start that game. And yes, he's expensive, and I think you get rid of him in the next few game weeks, certainly ahead of game week 27, 28 even. But this week, at home to Man United, I think it might be worth just holding on to him if you can for one more game week, rolling that dice a little bit, and hoping that he really pays or gives you the reward for waiting and being patient with him over the last few weeks. I think you play the situation ahead of you, not the one behind you in FPL. And Man United at home for Man City is a good fixture, and you know they're going to want to put out their best players in that game. Kevin De Bruyne, personally, I think he starts, and I think he'll play a really important part in that game to ensure City win the match. So for me, if I owned him, I'd be pretty tempted to hold on just for 1 week, and then I'd probably sell him in game week 28 personally. That being said, though, Kevin De Bruyne obviously is a good option for game week 27 in my view, but one player that might be tempting a lot of managers to shift across, and not even from just Kevin De Bruyne, by the way, because Son Heung-Min is 9.6, there are quite a few midfielders out there that you could switch if you've got a bit of money in the bank to get to Son Heung-Min, and there are plenty of reasons why you would look at doing so. So still fairly differential, considering he came back from the Asia Cup a few weeks ago. 16.1% ownership for a player of his ability and his amount of attacking returns is actually pretty low at the moment. So getting onto him at this point could be a chance to actually rise up the ranks pretty quickly if he got another explosive return, which we know he's capable of. On penalties, 18 attacking returns already this season and running along at about 0.6 XGI per 90. It's all very encouraging for Son Heung-Min. We know how attacking Spurs are. We know that they've got some good fixtures coming as well. So Crystal Palace at home is a decent fixture. Aston Villa away from home, not bad, but okay, not great. But they do play the high line. If Son can exploit that, he's got plenty of pace. If they can beat the offside trap once or twice, he's got as good a chance as any to get in behind that high line. And then game week 29, very importantly, Spurs will play in that week against Fulham away from home. So he's a potential captaincy shout in that game week, followed by Luton at home in game week 30 as well. So it's actually a really good run of games. The data's fantastic. He's still fairly differential. So there's plenty of reasons to jump on Son Heung-Min for game week 27 before the price starts to rise out of control again. And we might be looking at someone who's 9.9, 10 mil within a week or two. So again, I would wait before we see what the FA Cup 5th round results are, because if all of the expected results happen and you still want to avoid the free hit in game week 29, then a player like Son will be a really easy and obvious transfer for this week, because they would be one of the only teams and he would be one of the only good players that you could have in game week 29. And again, like I mentioned, possibly the key captaincy option in that game week. So you want to get on him as soon as possible. Whereas if a few upsets happen and game week 29 doesn't look like a week that you need to worry about as much, maybe Arsenal-Chelsea drops in, maybe Man United drops in, you never know what combination could happen. All of a sudden, Son might not be quite as important to jump on for game week 27 because there are going to be other options that are also appealing. On the flip side as well, you could be looking at free hitting for sure in game week 29, no matter what. Maybe you've committed to that strategy, or maybe you've not committed to that strategy and the fixtures in the FA Cup, the results go a certain way, and it makes free hitting look really appealing in game week 29 for you. If that happens, then again, the benefit of getting Son does decrease a little bit because you can just free hit him in game week 29 anyway, so you don't need to worry about that week. And then the fixtures around it, whilst good, there might be other midfielders that you're more tempted to jump on at a lower price or with better fixtures for 27, 28, and then 30, 31. But I think weighing it all up, even if you're free hitting in game week 29, the fixtures around it are still good for Spurs, and he's still a great option. So there's not really a lot I can say against going for Son Heung-Min, but what I would say is, like with all of the players right now, probably wait for the FA Cup results, see whether they go a certain way, and whether or not that changes your chip strategy, because that could affect how important getting Son as a transfer is, or whether or not you just bring it as a free hit potentially in game week 29. So I just wanted to chuck in a quick section on Pervis Estupinan, because somehow he survived another week in my FPL side, and it looks like he survived another week in a lot of managers' teams this week, because I think after Pastegate, as we're now calling it, we expected him to probably start in game week 26, and I don't know what he's done to deserve the consistent benchings he's been getting recently, but it's fair to say that he's not going to be guaranteed minutes for the foreseeable, and even if he might start against Fulham in game week 27, in 28 we're going to have the same problem all over again, and week by week we're just going to be worried about him. At 26% ownership, I think it's probably time that starts dropping pretty quickly now. And despite the fact his underlying data is decent, he's not really been performing at the level that we expect him to. And at 5 million, there are other options out there, especially Arsenal defenders, who might be a shade over 5 million, but they're definitely better value for money than a player that we just can't guarantee to start week in, week out at the moment. Also, not guaranteed the fixture in game week 29. He's probably got one of the least likely fixtures to go ahead in game week 29, because it's very likely either Man City or Brighton will progress in the FA Cup. And then following that, Liverpool away from home in 30 and then Brentford away from home in 31 is not a great run of fixtures after the blank game week 29 either. So because we can't guarantee him to start in either 27 or 28, I'd probably just say it's a pretty easy sell unless you've got loads of defensive bench cover and you can afford to bench him for the next couple of games. So a final section on Mo Salah, and he is going to become a factor in our FPL discussions over the coming game weeks. And we saw quite a few transfers last week. I think it was about 200,000 transfers in, despite the fact he didn't even have a game in game week 26. And in game week 27, despite the fact he didn't even make the bench in the Carabao Cup final yesterday, 100,000 managers have still chosen to transfer him in ahead of the Nottingham Forest game. So for what it's worth, I would say that is a big, big gamble based on the information we've got to hand right now. So I would say, unless you've already done it, please hold off buying Mo Salah unless we get some sort of more positive news going into game week 27. We'll have press conferences from Klopp. We'll have one ahead of the FA Cup game against Southampton. And obviously we'll see whether or not he makes the bench or even starts in that game. And then we'll also have another press conference, as well as training photos, as well as leaks potentially, ahead of game week 27 as well. So we'll get loads more information on Mo Salah throughout the week as to whether or not he's going to be fit to play game week 27. Now, if we put that to one side and we imagine for 1 minute that he is fit to start game week 27, which is a possibility, I would say it's unlikely at the moment, but it is definitely a possibility, then let's have a look at the fixtures and whether or not he's going to be a good buy for the next upcoming run. Now, Nottingham Forest, obviously, very clearly a good fixture for Liverpool. Man City at home, not fantastic, but those games do tend to be fairly blockbuster. And Salah, I would imagine, is going to play in that game. I think they're probably building up his fitness for that game. He's going to target that match next up for Liverpool. So I'd say, even though the fixture on paper doesn't look good, he's a world-class player. It's a big, big fixture for Liverpool, so I wouldn't say he's a bad own in that game. However, almost not quite certainly, because Southampton could pull off an upset, although as a Southampton fan, based on recent form, I'd say it's pretty unlikely we do. But that game against Everton in game week 29 could very easily be a blank. So unless you're planning on free hitting in game week 29, you're probably going to buy Salah for one good game against Nottingham Forest, a questionable one against Man City, and then a blank in game week 29, followed by two good games in 30 and 31, Brighton and Sheffield United, which means that if, for whatever reason, we know that he's going to start in game week 27, and you were planning on free hitting in game week 29, or Southampton pull off an upset and Liverpool will play in game week 29, then I think in that scenario, you could buy Mo Salah. And in fact, I'd almost encourage buying Mo Salah if we know he's going to start in game week 27, because his ownership has dropped massively. He will increase in price very quickly if we get a heads up that he is going to be fit to start in game week 27. And with an underlying XGI per 90 of over 1, he is one of the elite picks in FPL, no question about it. And he's going to be a good own for that run of fixtures. So again, I'd wait for the FA Cup results because that will impact your strategy there. But more importantly, with Mo Salah, I would wait to hear whether or not we get positive news as to whether or not he's fit to play in game week 27. Because if he is, and fixtures go a certain way, or you are planning on free hitting in game week 29, then he is going to be a very, very good player to buy ahead of game week 27. But it all really does depend on whether he's fit or not, and the results in the FA Cup. So those are my transfer tips ahead of game week 27. Please remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the content, as I try to reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of the season. In the meantime, though, I'll see you later this week as we prepare my team and hopefully yours as well for the game week 27 deadline.